extreme life situations, and you find quite a lot of people have been through one form of trauma in their lifetime. This is something that threatens people's physical and mental well-being. And some people might be wondering, why are we having this conversation today? I felt it is really important for us to have this whole conversation about trauma, because this is one topic that some people don't want to talk about. And when you talk to people and say, have you experienced trauma? Have you, in any form, shape, in your lifetime, have you had any kind of trauma? Some people shy away from answering or responding to that question. And in the course of counseling young women and couples alike, we have discovered that it has been an endemic problem. It is something that has caused quite significant problems in a lot of relationships. And what is so disheartening about it is that a lot of people are not even aware. They're not aware of their traumas. They're not aware that this is something that is having a massive impact on their relationship. Hello everybody, and welcome to our YouTube channel, Relationship Builders Forum. My name is Amara, and today I felt it is important for us to have this conversation on unresolved trauma and your relationship. Now, there's been a lot of ongoing debates around trauma, and the fact that a lot of people shy away from discussing or talking about their trauma freely, and I can understand why in some instances. And I felt it is really important because some people are going into relationship with baggages. They're going into relationship with unresolved trauma, and this is costing a lot of people massively. It is affecting and having a huge impact on people's relationship and even their well-being and the well-being of their significant other. So hence this conversation today. The different kinds of traumas, and when you talk to trauma professionals, they talk about the big T and the little t. Trauma can be in form of a childhood abuse, or somebody who has been through a rape incident, or somebody who's been stabbed, someone who's lost a loved one, or even someone that's been involved in a military combat. So there are different spheres and spectrum of trauma. Now, the focus of today's conversation is looking at trauma and how this would have a massive impact on any relationship. First thing to highlight here is that our brain is wired in such a way that if we have any unprocessed trauma in our lifetime, it's likely to have an impact, especially when we encounter any form of stressor, something that triggers it, something that reminds you of that incident. And quite a lot of us have been through it. And I might be sharing a few things about myself and how I have been as a woman, how I have been able to deal with some of my trauma, or even I have not been even aware of my trauma at some point in my life, and how this was beginning to have an impact on my relationship. So I'll start by saying that, if we have any form of unprocessed trauma in whatever form or shape, so say for example, you've been through a very stressful relationship prior, or somebody who have been in an abusive relationship, there is this likelihood that if you haven't quite processed that, then it's going to have a massive impact in your current relationship. There are three ways that people react to unprocessed trauma. They fight, they take a flight, or they freeze. So basically, you can keep running away. And that's why it is important to sit down and address this issue. Now, some people encounter these maybe in real life situation when they're faced with a debt to pay, or massive debt to pay, or when they're faced in a state of unemployment or in a state of homelessness. Sometimes these things tend to trigger unresolved trauma. Now, I will talk a little bit about the fight, the flight, and the freeze mode that people tend to take on, because there is a part of the brain. And of course, if you speak to psychologists, this is not a psychology class, but I felt it's really important to mention this. It's called the amygdala. Amygdala. It is a part of the brain that takes over you, and it begins to generate maybe a fighting or a flight or a fleeing a mode in terms of how you deal with your traumas. And these things happen especially in relationship when there is a conflict. People tend to take that sort of stance. Now, in that situation, you tend to maybe scream, you tend to act irrationally, you tend to be very angry in that sort of situation, and this could cause issues to escalate even further in your relationship and likely to cause massive problems as you go along in dealing or trying to resolve conflict. And that's because you haven't quite dealt with unresolved trauma in your life. Now, some people haven't quite overcome the issues around a parent leaving or having an alcoholic sibling or even parent, or being in an environment where you were constantly physically and even verbally abused. And this is likely to cause issues later on in your relationship when you begin to encounter scenarios where you are faced with what you had experienced before in the past. So what happens is that these things become stressors or they become triggers, and then you begin to act out in a way that you shouldn't if you were in control or if you have quite processed that trauma. So there are situations where we as women, or African women, I would say, sometimes we tend to shout, we tend to vent, we tend to scream or overly react, as some of our male counterparts would find in certain scenarios. And maybe this is something that we are used to. This is something that has been modeled consistently to us year in, year out. We have been experiencing someone who has shouted on us, verbally abused us in some way, form or shape, or maybe not maybe not even verbally abused us, but it's just a way of life, as we will find in a lot of African society, where you're reprimanded in a way where sometimes could come across as verbally abusive. Now we take on that, and sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where we have children and they do something wrong, we go straight to the default mode, and basically what we are acting out are things that we are used to. We haven't quite processed that. We go screaming at them, we go shouting at them, we go, whatever it is, like they have to hear me, and that's the way you have always been told. And I want to say that sometimes this causes a massive problem, because then you're passing on the things that you didn't like, the things that you experienced and you felt, when I have a child, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk to my child as gentle as possible. I'm going to make sure that my child has my undivided attention when I'm speaking to them. I will try to use the right level of tone. And sometimes you find yourself making all those promises, but sadly, you replicate the things that you didn't quite like. And that's what happens with traumas in some instances. Some instances, people just tend to freeze. They zone out. They don't know what to do. They have no clue whatsoever. And they just put a wall. They put a wall straight up and they say, no, I'm not dealing with this. I'm not having this. So either you fight, so you're screaming and, trying to verbalize it or act it out in one form, shape or form, or you flight, you take off, or you freeze. Basically, I don't care what is being said. I hear the words, but I'm not going to respond to it because I'm not listening to what is being said. So these are ways that people process their unresolved trauma. The second thing is that you could have a very rigid mentality on how to deal with things or issues in your relationship. Basically, you're dealing with those issues through the prism of your unresolved trauma. So you, in some instances, you are forced to believe, or you tend to believe the worst in your spouse, even when they didn't quite mean it that way. And sometimes could be very reactive and overboard. You go overboard with your emotions. You have these set rules. He's doing this just because of that, or he's treating me that way just because of this. And you're kind of very rigid. There is no room for flexibility whatsoever. This can cause massive problems in your relationship, I would say. Some instances you find people that's got this whole mentality about rigidity. They do not trust their spouse. They constantly suspecting them. They even get to the point that they want to control that other person. They want to be in charge of their life. They want to take over their life and possibly live their life for them. So they are used to that scenario, and they're so scared of being rejected. They're so scared of being abandoned. They're so scared of, the fact that my spouse might leave me to find intimacy elsewhere. So you're just stuck in that mentality because you're saying, no, look, I don't want to be in that state where I will be rejected. And what tends to happen in that relationship is that for some people who are in courtship, they want to reject that person before they reject them because they are sensing there is a rejection coming. So before I get to the point where I am rejected, I will be the one to reject first. Now, this is very, 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 I don't know what word to use, but it could have a massive impact on your relationship. And you find yourself in that cycle where you're constantly expecting this because you cannot trust somebody. You have abandonment issues and you feel that your partner would never be able to understand how you feel. And that's why you tend to act the way you act, because you're like, no, you don't get it. This is my trouble. This is my trauma. But I think that it is also very important to put things in perspective and also understand that this person hasn't been through your journey or haven't worked your shoes before. It might be useful for you to explain to them what it felt like being there. And I think this is something that a lot of people who have unresolved trauma cannot quite bring themselves up to speaking about. Being vulnerable is challenging for them. And if you are in that sort of relationship where you find the other person is exhibiting these signs, it might be important for you to create a safe space for them to be able to air their views without a sense of abandonment or a sense of rejection from you. The next point, I think this is really important, and it has a massive impact on a lot of single people who are in relationships that they have no business being in. And that is that, trauma can lead you to stay in an unhealthy relationship, even when you know that this relationship is hurting me. You choose to stay there because you have a pattern of being in an abusive relationship. Maybe there's some origin around you growing up in an abusive relationship. And basically you just feel like, I can't leave. I'm insecure. I have to be with this person because I've come to know them. At least I'm comfortable with them. And I don't want to leave for another relationship. I don't want to leave this person for another relationship. And you tend to accept and encourage and condone unhealthy or disrespectful behavior towards you. Even when you know that this is disrespectful, you tend to make excuses for this person, even when you know that being in this relationship is unhealthy for you. Being in this relationship is not something that is going to take you anywhere. So rather than you setting boundaries or rather than you leaving that relationship, you choose to put up with it. You choose to stay with it because that is the familiar. You feel that a dysfunctional relationship is the best way that you can do or feel. You feel too scared to be alone. You don't want to be alone. Oh, I don't want to leave this person because if this person leaves me, that means I'm just all by myself. So you feel the need to be around this person even when you know that this relationship is hurting you. In this scenario, you take so much guilt. You tend to be manipulated, and this happens with people who have been in a family where they had dysfunctional parents and they've just been stuck there and they feel like, I don't want to leave them, because you have this sense of this is family and I have to be there. And what has happened is that because this trauma is still unresolved, you have taken this out and it's actually damaging you in a relationship that you have no business in being in the first place. In fact, let me also say that some people are just drawn to abusive relationships. Some people are just attracted to abusive relationships. Some people feel that, oh wow, that's all that I know. That's all that I have experienced. I have no other knowledge of. In fact, if the relationship is not abusive, then it's odd. It's strange, because that's something that they're not used to. That's something they're not familiar with. So they would rather stay in an abusive relationship because they feel this is familiar, this is something I'm used to, this is something I have been experiencing, rather than being in a relationship that would cause them to thrive and, to grow and flourish. Because it's just not them. They still have that unresolved trauma and they just want to be stuck there. Some people also are so addicted to this, they're so drawn to this, that they reject people who are genuinely respectful. They reject people who are genuinely honest. They reject people that are genuinely upfront with them because they feel this is odd. I cannot accept this, or I don't deserve this. So they constantly putting themselves and, embracing abusive relationship rather than staying far away from abusive relationship. Now, this is very damaging. If you find yourself in this situation, it is really important that you take a pause and take yourself away. Really evaluate, really reflect on what you really want in life. Because a lot of times people find themselves in this situation where they feel that they don't have any self-worth whatsoever. They don't have any value, personal value. They feel that they are nobody. They feel that nobody cares about me. I want to say to you that you are loved. You are enough. You don't need anyone to validate who you are. And it's down to you rediscovering who you are. I know that sometimes we go through these traumas, and in some instances we cannot help it because we are sometimes embedded in it. Sometimes it's an environment that we grew up in, but it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of the world. And I'm specifically in this video addressing women who feel less of themselves and you feel like I'm not good enough, right? You have only given yourself that permission to say that you're not good enough, but you can also begin to walk yourself away from that. You can walk yourself away from that pit. You can walk yourself away. There's a lot of value in who you are. There's a lot of value that you bring. And I want to say that if only you can give yourself a chance, you will flourish and you will blossom, right? And it is down to you discovering who you are. You cannot discover who you are if you don't know who's made you. And it's really important because it is who we are that we bring into our relationship. And if we are damaged, that is what we will exhibit in our relationship. If we're damaged women, we'll be damaged wives, we'll be damaged mothers, and we're trying to constantly fix things when all that we need is just fixing ourselves. And I just want to, maybe just a word of encouragement to you out there. You're enough, but first of all, you need to assess yourself and assess and identify the triggers. Do not be scared of identifying the triggers. Do not run away from it. Do not shy away from it. Speak to someone if you must. Speak to a professional if you must. But you must begin to navigate that journey, right? And until you walk that walk, you cannot come out of it, right? And you are not the first. And I want to say you are not alone in all of this, right? But you must be willing to take the right step in the right direction. I hope this was quite useful to anybody who's listening to me right now. And I hope that you're able to reach out to myself and my husband, both of us co-hosts on Relationship Builders Forum. And we're more than happy to help you. And where possible, if we cannot help you, or if we think that this is something that somebody else within our circle is able to help you with, would definitely signpost you to trusted people. People will know that will be willing to help you navigate this process. But first of all, you have to own it. You have to own it. You have to say, look, I am going to take this part. I'm going to work this work. And I'm going to make sure that I come out better than I was before. We love you so much. I personally love you. And I want to say, please, let us know, write to us, let us know what your journey is like, and we would love to hear from you. Maybe there are things that we didn't quite cover in this video. It would be great to hear that from you. And, just put your comments on the chat, like this video, share this video with people you know might find this thing useful. Okay? And until the next time, it's goodbye.